Okay. All right, so let's try that again, everyone. Maybe just quick reprise. I'm Scott Anderson. I mostly make APIs I work in data engineering and cloud architecture consulting. I generally don't do the massive website approach. We'll talk about what I think makes sense in which places a little later on. But so I was saying when we kind of encountered audio issues. I imagine, opinions are going to differ in the room on how people feel about frameworks. So, who here really likes frameworks? More than I thought. Interesting. Okay. And anyone kind of with me on, preferring to make that stuff go away? Okay, I got a little help here. Fun time. Well, here's some of what I find painful here. Okay, and feel free to hop in anytime on any of these. So, first, one of the top ones that makes me angry, honestly, is framework abandonment. When I go and write something in a framework and come back in the framework, like say I come back in half a decade later and it's not there. Sometimes it's not half a decade later, but I had that one recently professionally. It's fun times. Also, if you start using a framework, then whenever they change the API on you, you're going to have to remove everything they deprecate and move along because you don't control it anymore. They tend to import a bunch of their own libraries, so not only do I have to have a bunch of extra dependencies sucked in, I also deal with the security patches for those. I still have to deal with porting some weird error someone made in Jackson, literally like 7 years ago, on Spring projects. I see the rare occasion I have to deal with them. And also, Lawrence.
You're against frameworks. Are these also against
No. I think that there is an interesting question of kind of in that spirit of would you want? Oh, the camera's over here, isn't it? Oh, okay. I think that there is an interesting question. You might be able to draw a kind of parallel of how much do you want your operating system to be batteries included versus just giving me the basics and let me do my own thing as well. But reasonable people can differ on that, and you're right that the definition of framework can be very amorphous here. So we might discuss that a little more as we go further here. But other things I find annoying here, and the remaining two kind of go together, is I have to learn new things for, like, let's take who here in the room has looked at Java Spring, for instance. So what I find, annoying is, not only can someone go and just decide that they're going to make beans in XML, but then I have to not just know that I have to have tools on my computer to deal with your beans because, if I just go, I can't put a breakpoint in an XML file just kind of natively. So I have to go adopt a whole tool chain for, basically you're forcing me into things like IntelliJ when I'd really rather not. I'm going to talk about the framework abandonment one in a little more detail here. So Go's current main frameworks, there are two here with their icons kind of up top. So Gorilla Mux and Jin here. You can probably guess which icon refers to which. So Jin, we'll start actually with Jin here. Jin is a successor framework to a framework that got abandoned called Martini. So kind of built into just, the project there is part of what I'm talking about. I had to go, you have to go switch this thing over. Gorilla Mux is an interesting one where I believe around mid 2023, there was a spat where the maintainers kind of resigned and they're like, yeah, we're marking this deprecated. And then they found new maintainers, yada, yada, yada. I took a look at the GitHub repo for Mux probably about 7 days ago, preparing this talk, 7 to 10 days ago. And an issue had just been posted of, is this still maintained? There haven't been any commits to it in about 13 months. And, that issue had been up for some number of days, not a massive amount of time, but unclear if anyone's actually maintaining it again. So I didn't actually check back. I don't know. Might be broken again. There's another one called Echo, but I'm I'm kind of betting that it goes by the wayside, to be honest. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit more later. So I started thinking about this, like, is this pattern of the frameworks disappearing like this common? And, I haven't been a Go developer for 10 years, but I did start learning Python about 10 years ago. And this is basically the 5 options I had for respectable frameworks in Python when I started learning Python. So a lot of people in the room will know Django. That's still around. You can still use that. It's still a respectable, choice for, you could go and set up like your REST API or a website. If it's respectable within, Python as far as that goes. We can discuss that afterwards. Tornado and Flask still exist, are still maintained, are used in some kind of processes in some places. No one would really start a project with them except out of kind of like lazy convenience today. Like everyone would use Starlet/Fast API today, or, there's always niche frameworks. So, I mean, these two are not dead, but they're kind of dying and you can kind of see the issue. And the other two, Web2Py hit a critical security thing and everyone ran away, so you had to get off of Web2Py. And Pyramid just kind of basically lost all of its people either to Django on the one hand or Flask on the other hand, so it died as well. So, I mean, if I threw a dartboard at the 5 options I had, one of them would have been one that would still be respectable to start a project you were going to maintain in today. So it's not really just a Go thing. This happens all the time. But there are some framework positives we want to get to here. So what do we like about frameworks? You give us a lot of common patterns that are maintained by others. If it saves us a lot of time if you already know what your Spring Beans are and already have all the stuff to deal with them. And so, you can add in a lot of features in here that standard library maintainers aren't willing to, deal with the evolution of. So you can cover a lot more like theoretically doing stuff for the for the program, things to save programmer time. Also, some of them have some pretty nice code generation tools. Am I missing any, by the way? Anyone have any other things they want to hit on? I want to cover on the code generation side here, though. So in general, in Go, you're not going to, in the standard library, you're not going to get the standard library itself to do code generation for you. But what you can do is you can define your endpoints in something like Swagger/OpenAPI and get code generated from there. It won't be as complete a code generation as something like Ruby on Rails will do for you, but I mean, it's it'll still get all your interfaces set up for you. You will have to glue in a few more things, but it can get you on a similar path. Similarly, funny story, I don't actually really use this directly in a lot of ways day to day, because in general I have a directive where I have to provide gRPC and HTTP endpoints for basically everything I do. So what I do is I just basically define a protobuf file that we call it compiling. A protobuf file it means something a lot different than what compiling usually means. And then basically I get transcoding to HTTP from there. So I get code generation in any language I want from there just as easily. And, that's an interesting way we can, talk more about sometime. I want to have a look here at, the overall package, by the way, and just, call out some what we're going to use here. So it's a pretty clean package. Everything's in. Really, HTTP2 is just an import for if you want to either just support HTTP2 generally, or if you want to do things like WebSockets, you'll need it. But I mean, in general, you can just kind of set a flag for, whether you want to support HTTP2 or not. It doesn't really matter. So we're kind of going to skip that one, not going to lie. But so, okay. HTTP space, we obviously need clients and servers. And so we will go ahead and call our API with the clients. We'll implement some code here just for fun on doing this, but we're more talking about the server side. So let's take a look at what we have to work with in lieu of frameworks here. Now, if we if we have some fun here, it's in a standard library implementation. One of the fun things you end up with is people talk a little more nerdy when naming their classes in a standard library. So what the vast majority of frameworks would call a router, we're going to call a serve mux, where mux is in multiplexer, similar to how it's in some people in this room would say I should be using tmux later, by the way. So tmux is a multiplexer. Anyone know what mux and tmux really means? This multitude of inputs, we're going to put out a single output. So essentially, you can, whatever sort of terminal you're writing to, it's only going to go to one of the terminals. Similarly, whatever request is submitted, it's only going to go to one of the routes. So that's all mux really means, but standard library people like to talk like this, and you either like that or you don't. Right. So this is actually, one of the, main things we'll be implementing here. And I mean, ultimately, really, I just want to kind of show the general size of this. This is, if you take a look, this is, remember, this is with the clients and the HTTP2 support. I mean, it's all pretty compact here. So you can learn this whole library, and it's, and then use it whenever you hop into a new project. So let me. Okay, yeah. So where I think this makes sense. So let's talk about this. Is this is where Jim's going to be really interested. So, where would I do this, and where would I do something massive? Or where would I go framework? That is. So if I do a lot of work where I am making an API, and I hope no one's going to touch it for many years. In that case, I think that really lends itself to this sort of thing. Someone can pick it up later, and you don't have to deal with however things have drifted over time. If you're making like a sprawling web app with a bunch of pages that you're going to be updating for your users of, we just rolled out our new whatever, like daily, weekly updates, large teams interacting with all this. I think there's a technical answer that you can do this with something like, first, you probably do want to go framework space there. And I would say there's a technical answer that you can do this in Go with something like Go plus Gin plus Temple plus Air, et cetera, et cetera. I think, from a technical side, I can certainly argue that. From a business side, I'm going to tell you could probably get that done a lot cheaper in Java or C#. So, there's a technical versus business distinction there, where the walls speak C# around here. So, yeah, we'll say C#. And so, okay, yeah, so I actually kind of skipped where we're going to start in implementation space.
Those columns prototype and production.
Not really. I mean, so, there are a lot of places where, a lot depends on, are you developing APIs as microservices, or are you making big monolith things? So, I mean, I have a lot of APIs that, can be, put out there. In general, they don't spend much time in, they get done in, they get promoted up through dev, non-prod, and then production. And then, candidly, a lot just stays out there. Things, and so a lot of what I'm talking about here are things where you are interacting with, say, a lot of API calls to big three cloud providers. Things about IAM permissions. A lot of what I do is on the security side with that, but in general, that stuff doesn't change that much, and so it doesn't have to be constantly operated on. So it's not at all uncommon that I pick up something that has been out there untouched for at least 18 months, and you can kind of like form a trail of almost a kind of like stat distribution escaping my head at the moment, but you'll get some extreme cases of that where I picked up something that's been out there for 8 years recently. So that's kind of the idea there. But so I want to hop into some Go code here, and then we'll head back there shortly. So what I'm going to do is I was messing with the on the debug side, we're going to actually use VS Code here because it'll be a lot more friendly to have a look at here. But let me hop here too. Let's take a look at about the simplest one of these I could. No, not yet, not yet. Let's take a look at about the simplest one of these I can put together. So here we have basically just the routing logic, not even doing anything in the database.
Just zoom in just a little bit.
Yeah, good point. And so I actually want to have just a little fun here with before we go and implement anything. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pop off a, let me first show what making 20 of these looks like. And then we'll, and we'll see. Go talks have a tendency to devolve into talking about concurrency a lot. But the really cool thing about this is we get, okay, is that we're going to get our concurrency right out of the box. So just starting up our web server over here in debug mode. If we take a look here, just so what I've done here is I've popped off 20 of these asynchronously. So the way this works here is, so how many in the room are kind of, how many of you use Go as kind of like a first, second, or third language, I guess? Or who feels, I mean, no, not too many hands, but so what's going on here is I'm going ahead and making 20 API calls that aren't actually getting back because they're now blocked by the breakpoint on the router here. And so what I want to show here is if we, nope, the W side. So in our Go thread that we're in here, we can see that this thread sees all, almost there. We will go and quickly, what I'm going to do here is just say, if I change this to 200, we can see that we get an async server out of the box here, and candidly Go just, it's just the first thread is just saying, yeah, I got all 20 of those, it's no problem. But if we, what I was getting at here is that if we go and throw it 200, it will go and automatically start Go routines off nothing more complicated than this super basic code you see over here on the right. If I close this, you are getting these HTTP calls served by different Go routines grouped by, where there's capacity. It's not, truly full, isolation. The point is you can, I don't have to do any async magic to make this an asynchronous server. So why doesn't everyone go and make their standard library set up for things like an ability to do everything in the standard library like this? And I mean, it's all Turing complete. Of course, you can, right? But what's actually difficult about this is that routing is more complicated than you might think. So if you think about pattern matching routes, it seems like a really easy problem. Seems like it's got to be sublinear. But naive approaches will blow up to linear once you take into account that we support all of these things nowadays of dynamic URL parameters. And so given that you do that, you start having to implement things to keep this a sublinear process like a radix tree, which is a kind of, I think it's actually pronounced try when it's in the TRIE form. But so basically like imagine your kind of autocomplete on a text box when you're typing into it, as resolving what possible things, if there are like 20 things you match and then all dropping out as you type more of the word. It uses similar logic to how you walk down a radix tree / try. So yeah, standard library maintainers don't want to put this kind of thing in standard library because people come up with some new thing that they want to support as like a route feature and that kind of thing, and then suddenly it's either people want to hop off of the standard library implementation to do the new cool thing, or they have to go and update it and potentially introduce new bugs or change interfaces, things you try not to do in the standard library. Also, because we have the native async here, trying to do that with async wouldn't come out, and library implementation is clean in most languages. So in Go 122, basically, they gave us pattern matching where we can deal with all of that. We can deal with the pattern matching, in a way we're used to. All the dynamic things. Add a. I should say. Oh my goodness! I left. I was on PowerPoint slides. But so I can so this sort of thing with with these, you can kind of follow along what I was talking about there. But I should say I hate the way they did this, actually. Like, I think this is disgusting, writing like putting get just within your string parameter to be parsed out. I mean, I think this is super lame, to be honest. Like, just make it 2 arguments. I mean, really. But I want to talk briefly about the this idea that in using frameworks we can avoid some of our dependency issues here. So, or in not using frameworks we can avoid some of our dependency issues here. True to a point, however. There's a certain kind of developer. Maybe we should pick on JavaScript for a second here. I mean, if you're the kind of person who might have imported an is-even function because it was available in NPM, this might not be for you. Because the way I think about this is like, I'm in consulting, right? So, I mean, everything can be put on a 2x2 grid. And so there are, security severity issues, and there's also what you'll actually get fired for, and in principal agent risk space. And I mean, if you go and import some 5-star package doing something basic into an enterprise project, that might have been covered, something that might have been covered by a framework just to take care of something simple that you could have just written yourself, and that 5-star thing it turns out to be some kind of malware thing, like that might be the kind of thing that you have to talk to HR about. So that's just that's my thoughts on that one. So
vulnerabilities in the standard library all the time. I know, because they're always fixing them.
Yeah. And no one will get fired for that one. No one will get fired for that one. Yeah. So what are we missing? So Jim, what kind of features do you think we need to have to be kind of enterprise grade here?
What's the bunch?
Yeah, why don't you?
So, authentication, compression, rate limiting, throttling, logging.
There is. I mean,
data binding, validation.
I mean, yep. Much of this we can handle with other standard library packages. I'm fishing for kind of the big enterprise one around testing that everyone is like, oh, you have to have that. And some developers like it, a lot of developers hate it. But I mean, I was, I was actually going to go through more code earlier. Okay. Yeah, so I get a little annoyed with the idea that we have to do frameworks for dependency injection, which is often kind of the argument here of why I really have to have all of these massive things like in Spring here. So this is, I know this one's going to be hard to see, but who here kind of recognizes this view?
I think it's made an exception.
Yeah. So I mean, so this is the debug, freeze on stack trace in IntelliJ, kind of like a pretty standard grab from IntelliJ for debugging what is a hello world Spring application where the only parameter is name and it's still set to world. But what irks me about this is, I mean, if we have a look at, this actually keeps going here. You're about 33 deep on your call stack, just having set up your framework that gives you this dependency injection and all that. And so I think there must be a better way on that. And it turns out there's two. So one thing we can do, and I think I'm probably running behind on time here at this point. Yes.
You're okay. You got time.
Okay. So one thing we can do about this is we can. So if I let's pull up a more kind of, something that can actually talk to a database and all of that fun. So really, we don't even have to. We can actually do dependency injection manually. I mean, you can actually just build your database, swap out your database config here. Doesn't have to be in main either. You can actually unit test all of this. But so basically, in order to get dependency injection, we don't have to actually do that mess. We can do some frameworks that, I mean, candidly, Uber has one. So Uber has one, Google has one, and Facebook has one. They all look about the same. None of them are going to give you anything like 33 deep on your call stack just for a hello world, which I do appreciate. So that's definitely a good thing. So before we hop into what this looks like, kind of on implementation that actually will talk to SQL and Dockerize and all that fun, I just want to cover. So this slide here is maybe kind of a tribute to a British marketing guy called Rory Sutherland. Anyone know who I'm talking about? Does some interesting lectures. So he's got this idea that options become obligations. The idea being, if I can do something, it might seem like an option at first, but I might be forced into it later. So an example might be, you might have saw an interesting thing. I think this was kind of interrupted by probably like a rise in what's called shrinkage in retail, but you might have noticed like a big expansion in your option to self-checkout in a grocery store, starting about a year ago. And if some stores went to basically all self-checkout, and then they started losing too much money from theft, so they undid it. But if they didn't lose too much money from theft, your option to self-checkout would have gone away in a lot of places, right? And so similarly, here in Go, if what most people are looking for gets done without a framework, it's probably going to cut into the actual framework development. So, I mean, I'd expect really Gin to be the only one that goes for kind of full, a more kind of, call it, what would be the most comparable. I'm not sure, like a kind of a particular language, pair of language and framework that I'd compare it to, but probably not going to see a bunch of new frameworks coming to Go, because you can take care of a lot of this in the standard library. So let's just take a look at. So I have this up here. Good. Through here, beyond what it takes to do this, what our actual routing looks like implemented with, use Postgres because it's free. Don't need a license for it. Nice, just kind of simple implementation here of what it actually takes to. It's 704. Basically, the way we do this in a more as we expand it out is really we're going to register our routes with the router. Again, router is just our what we're pointing everything, attaching all of these to. But so if I try hopping into the actual, logic under these. All we really need to do is point to our, functions for this, and then our, data logic here. We can actually get all of this done in not too many bits at all, and hot swap this. But I guess maybe instead of just kind of poking around in here, I guess where do we have who has questions? I guess because I think we're kind of getting a little close to time here.
You have to answer this, but where you were in the transaction.
So I mean, you can go you can go deeper on. I mean, I'm doing simple resource here, but yeah, I mean, as you go into it's the more you have multiple joined things, the more you'll want to do that sort of thing.
I've got a question. So you mentioned Postgres. How about SQLite? Have you used that?
I actually haven't used it with Go, but I mean, I'm sure you can. Yeah. Right. The only I wonder if does anyone know if there's support for SQLite 3 in Go standard library? I don't know if there is or not. Because so if there is, the funny thing that would actually accomplish there is if we take a look at like the only actual dependency I have here on any kind of thing outside standard library is actually a little Postgres plugin. So in doing that, if you did SQLite 3, I could actually make it something you could go, completely, go 100% dependency free. Only thing you'd have to do would be update, your actual Go runtime itself now and then. So, yeah, that's actually worth looking at. So, the underlying, SQL here is, there's a pretty full-fledged, SQL library included in the standard library as well. But yeah, it would actually be kind of cool to do it on SQLite 3 if you could actually have no dependencies at all. I might actually look at that's interesting. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I saw a tutorial recently, and the guy was doing something similar to what you've done there. But he mentioned that for a user to authenticate, if you have specific calls that you want to be authenticated to be able to make, so your API that the standard library doesn't handle that well. Is that your experience?
So, well, I mean, authentication strategy is, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to do this sort of thing. So, I mean, first question is, are you going to do session-based or like a JWT kind of thing? And well, within that, I mean, so the sort of social, okay, I guess actually the way I would really cut this up, honestly, is first question is, are you like B2B or are you B2C? Oh no, I'm not saying. I'm not going. I'm saying the way I would think about how to do authentication, in general, would be if you're well, I guess there's actually three cases I would go through. There's B2B, B2C, and there's like internal to an organization. And so internal to an organization, you're probably interacting with something like Azure Active Directory or Entra ID or whatever you guys are calling it now, or Google's identity provider platform, whatever that. AWS has their Cognito shenanigans, or no, the other one would be what you would probably. I don't remember the right name in AWS space, but in business to consumer, honestly, a lot of places you're still going to need to provide like username and password as an option, but everything's going, social login stuff. That stuff, it is going to be an external dependency, but it's pretty easy to do. It's a stock implementation. It is a dependency though. And then where you're probably in the most trouble is if you're doing B2B and you need to support multiple different identity providers from like, say like Walmart is a customer of yours and they have, I've never worked for for Walmart, directly or by proxy. I'm just going to assume that they run their company off of Azure Active Directory / Entra ID, SAML based. You'd have to support their own like SAML flow on an SSO login. Conversely, you might, if you also have something like, newfangled Magic Corp as a client, and they're using Okta. The company probably doesn't exist that has both Walmart and Newfangled Magic Corp as a client, but that would be a different SAML workflow. And then you might have to support, say, like OIDC for someone else and that kind of thing. And that's where, you are definitely going outside standard library for that. I mean, all of it in theory can be done, but you do not want to roll your own auth on that kind of thing. I would not say, but yeah, authentication, big topic, separate meetup. So we can go through all that, but one way or another, you're either getting you're probably getting cookies or tokens, one way or the other.
So just kind of roll back to a comment I made previously, which was what about prototype versus production? I completely agree. If you're doing something quick and dirty, you don't have a lot of production needs, you don't care about authentication, you don't care about answering, you don't care about authorization. If there are 100 things you don't have to care about, you just want to write something and get it out there as fast as possible. Absolutely, just stick to the basics. But then when you start to talk about, I'm writing an API that brings you to production space and like public facing.
Yeah.
Now I'm more concerned to you, but the question is,
public facing, you're not getting away with no dependencies. I'm going to agree.
Writing your own framework, it's going to be done because it's not what you do.
So I guess the first question I'd ask there is, first, are you writing an API or are you writing like a website? If you're writing a website that's going to be, I'm going to be hosting all of these different SPA things. I mean, yeah, I've kind of already conceded early on, like I wouldn't even use Go with frameworks, honestly. Sorry about the meetup. From a business perspective, I wouldn't, even use Go with frameworks for putting together like, hi, this is my, like 50-page website with a storefront and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the reality is there are just far cheaper ways to get that done.
I mean, I guess I would say you could, if you wanted to take this approach, this is how you wanted to build your APIs. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing day to day. And then you do need to expose something. You could always throw an API gateway product in front of it that does all the awesome things.
That was next.
And then you're just working the simple thing. You're building your API, gateway handles all the other stuff. But agree that like if you're doing like HTML rendering and all that stuff, like don't do that. I agree with you there. I don't know how others do, but you could just throw this behind the gateway that handles the more complicated stuff.
Right. So, as I think through, like, I mostly do launch APIs for internal consumption, and so there are some things that are easier there. There's some. Well, I wouldn't say harder. I'd just say they're niche. So you have to actually kind of build it from the real documentation and not just do some kind of template approach. But fundamentally, it's an easier task.
I would disagree with it because that might have been like the old school way of doing things. You build a moat around your castle, and if you can't get across the moat, you can't do this anymore. But the motion in the industry has been towards zero trust architectures. So you do need to do authentication and authorization every year.
Well,
I'm concerned about caching every year, rate limiting and fraudulent every year. It's not just a gateway concern where you put it in front of the castle or surround your castle with it and pretend like everything's safe.
well, yeah, I mean, data exfiltration and full access kind of things are probably not a majority of security concerns at this point. I mean, where I see most bug fixes coming across things I actually use are things like, well, they couldn't actually get anything, but a DDoS could totally take this down from just essentially overloading your CPUs, causing just dramatic spike. And it's a lot easier to write an attack that will bring down servers than it is to like actually, a lot more exploits exist and come out nowadays to get to that sort of thing than for like actually yank, I have your data now, that kind of thing, because it all goes through auth.
It seems like there's a standard package for middleware. So if you're looking to do those authentications of logging, you're looking to the standard package.
Yeah. There is. That's also
in that HTTP. But I kind of agree, stay away from frameworks, but I disagree, stay away from frameworks just for the matter of, why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to?
Yeah. So when it comes,
you can really do things fast.
Yeah, so when it comes to middleware, I'm going to be kind of between you two because that's where you might actually end up, the framework might actually make you faster there. So I guess, really one of the interesting things here is what is the shape of like for a kind of x-axis of, either size of, we could think of it in user space, or I would probably think of it in terms of size of the project. How do we feel about where frameworks are kind of the most value added choice? And I would argue frameworks kind of have a like I would argue if it's very simple, I don't want the framework. If it's kind of middle complexity, which a good chunk of things are, that's where like actually getting the code gen will actually really benefit me in some places. And if it's going to be absolutely massive, it's going to be a kind of thing where like candidly you are going to write your own framework, and that's good. Where if it's something that's huge, you probably
I would disagree with writing your own framework. It's like saying, well, you're going to need a really good database to write yourself.
Yeah.
Probably not the right.
Well, I suspect Amazon.com doesn't run on Spring, right? Like I imagine they put their own stuff together because you'll hit the actual limits of what you can do with, they had to write their own database for Black Friday with DynamoDB, right?
I think one of the things that's kind of the middle ground that we haven't much touched on is, it's more the toolbox approach as opposed to the framework approach, which personally is what I find preferable. Yeah. Unfortunately, nobody seems to want to do that.
Can I paraphrase toolbox to libraries, or what do you mean by that?
So, a framework, right? You're forced into the construct of the framework. You have to work with it. Whereas the toolbox approach is, again, it's libraries.
Yeah.
Framework is a set of libraries, but you have to use them all together.
Right.
Toolbox is I'm going to pick this library, this library, this library, this library, and make them play nice together. And so, you could have even the little thing you mentioned earlier about like not liking the way the router parameters, right? You write your own little library for how you do routers, or pull in a third-party dependency that's just about doing routing and not doing the whole like framework.
We used to have an evaluation matrix for like open source, any kind of open source we were bringing into the company, and we evaluated, how many users there were, how many developers there were, and so forth, to try to eliminate some of those problems of like framework abandonment and so forth. And then I also have a comment about write your own, is that I've seen a lot of places that wrote their own, and they got so far behind the curve that then they had to do a conversion to whatever was commercially available because they were no longer able to support what they wrote. So there are trade-offs in everything you do. So,
technically, NetHTTP is a framework. It just happens to be the one route type things.
Right.
And in Java space, there are 1,000,001 frameworks, libraries, whatever tools that you can use.
Yeah, but it's hyper Pareto, man.
And they make you very productive. If you had to use just base Java to write everything, you would be a lot less productive.
We have a firm that specializes in Micronaut here in town, and even then, I never really see it's so dominated by Spring. It's just overwhelmingly dominated by Spring. There's probably, just as like in the post Go 1.22 world, I'm arguing, like on this one, I'm basically arguing that people are going, if this is kind of the easiest way to get things done in Go. People keep doing that. I mean, yes, there's a lot of people doing Spring and Java. There's a lot of people doing Spring and Java, and then people have gone and written the stuff for it and manage all your XML beans and that kind of thing in IntelliJ, and it doesn't really matter to. So I mean, part of the reason I like this way of operating is I will often have something like half a dozen projects open just because kind of nature of the way the work I do is like I'm not on a single project that I am making this app great and it gets an update every day. It's I'm going over here and then I'm also maintaining this and someone else is pushing me code for this that I'm reviewing. And if I have 6 projects open, I do not want the Java heap space of 6 IntelliJ instances, to be blunt, because this one is a pretty new one, but my work computer is almost 4 years old. So that is just not doable. So that's, maybe that's where part of my hatred comes from.
I think that there's 2 aspects to what I want to ask, but one particularly is, in my experience, developers and development teams choose a particular framework because it helps them solve a problem. And having been there while Spring grew up and from the very introduction of it, trying to figure out what the heck is this dependency injection container, all the way to today, the intent has been to successfully solve problems in a way that makes it easier to develop software that has to solve those problems. So it's not that the only way, it certainly isn't the only way. And that's where you get to your point, I think, which ends up being sort of framework burnout. Because Spring has gotten so large these days, I have no idea what all is in there. I mean, I've been working with it for 20 years. And the parts of it I haven't explored because I haven't needed them. But that's the great thing about it, is I can put them to the side. Other frameworks and things have gotten really big. React, Angular, huge JavaScript frameworks in the front end. You have to almost be expert in them. People relevant is that ultimately saying, I don't want to learn all that. I don't want to learn JavaScript and Java and C# and Go and CSS and HTML. If I do something like I would learn one thing and do everything.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people with Go are. I learn one thing and just that's all I have to know. These people know JS, JavaScript, I learn one thing, that's all I have to know.
That's good. And there's an argument that the framework approach will start working better in the future and that everything will get more sticky with these like AI, helper agents and whatnot, where if it's in the same way that once people kind of, if everyone was doing Spring, you could go get a Spring developer and that kind of thing. I mean, if all the code that's out there on like Stack Overflow, that the AI things parse, like, there then be such an advantage of like the AI helper will help you out a lot more in what existed a year ago than what someone just launched today. So, Svelte, Solid.js, sorry, React has the big, corpus of stuff out there. What did I? No, it doesn't matter.
An example of that in JavaScript space is HTMX.
Well, HTMX, yeah, a lot of people would use that in Go, and it's slightly BS. Maybe that one is not. That's not a prod ready thing, and I think the maintainers of the library pretty much acknowledged that this was like not really.
Second generation.
What?
Second generation.
What?
JS. Basically, it is a framework, but it had attributes to HTML tags that translated to ultimately REST calls.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, and in that kind of what I was talking about on if you wanted to try going down a more framework-like approach with like Gin plus Temple plus Air, like HTMX is often used kind of.
One small framework without all the other dependencies that would typically get answered from React. That's kind of where again framework. I'm sure it's overkill, but the words to use. Basically, the idea that people are getting tired and worn out by huge frameworks where there's so much to learn. And so, that's why it is sometimes refreshing to say, take a simple approach with something simple. And I'm perfectly in line with that.
Yeah, I'll still look up kind of where people are currently with HTMX. My understanding was a lot of even the maintainers were kind of stepping back from the idea that it was prod ready. But okay, I'll have to see kind of where that is.
I like React. I don't see what the problem is. Like, why do people get React so much? I think React is great. I really like HTMX because I very often put up the smallest possible unit as a web app or something, just to like deliver data, deliver analytics to someone that they play around with. And HTMX is great for just the smallest, just doing like database calls. You can also just do that with HTML. You can do it with JSP too. What is JSP?
It's old. Like, what are we talking? Mid 2000s, roughly speaking.
Instead of HTML in Java code, it's Java code in HTML.
Yeah. There have been a few of those. Like, there was a thing in like ASP.NET space earlier when people were doing like a VB script kind of thing, wasn't there? Like,
the thing about options becoming obligations, I think that feeds into what you're saying too about how people get tired of like this framework, and they want to get down to bare bones, and but so many times that leads to we're going to start this new small framework, and then that new small framework grows into the thing that nobody wants.
This is the XKCD, yeah.
I really liked there was an article that compared that talked about product development, and it applies. Product development stuff is always about the app, but to me, like, it applies down to code too, because we're the consumers of the product, but the code that we wrote, right, as developers. And there was a person who made the analogy to watchmaking, because a feature in watch, everything a watch does is not a feature. We say everything is a feature. Do that, and then we lose track of like what's actually important. And watches are features and complications.
All right.
The features are the things that the watch has to do to be a watch, which is tell time. Everything else is a complication. And when you look at your frameworks that way, or your applications that way, or your end user products that way, it really kind of tweaks your perspective quite a bit, and has made for some really interesting conversations for me with product developers and things like that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Falling into the feature.
Or complication.
By the way, nobody describes spring beans in XML.
I've had to pick some stuff apart lately. That interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'd love to see what you guys are up to now, because I had to pick apart a program that someone lost the source code for, so that explains why.
Do you have any like benchmark data on any of the approaches that we talked about tonight?
Oh, like from a performance perspective? I mean, I didn't even think to bother comparing on. So a lot of the Go ones, use the same interfaces anyway, so it can get a little murky. But
I'll just throw out there that one that I found indicated that June was something like 25% faster than HTTP in terms of requests per second throughput.
Right. Did you see anything about and I have no idea how to pronounce it. It's either Chi or Kai or Chai, CHI. That's
one there.
Got it.
HTTP, June, Echo.
Okay, I've never heard of Echo. But
yeah,
Chi or whatever it is. That's. I mean, I know that Jin is obviously big and popular, but
I forget if Kai's the successor to Echo or Echo's the successor to Kai.
I don't have any idea.
I never.
It's gaining a lot of popularity. I know that, but
interesting. Okay, that's something I don't know like that.
I was just wondering because in the community that seems to believe that performance is the most important attribute of software. I couldn't find anything.
How much money it makes our stakeholders is the most important that they pay us.
Yeah. Did not, but thank you.
all right. We are at 7:30, so I'm going to go ahead and cut us off there. We do have a handful of giveaways.